Thank you, Ed, and thanks to the Palestine Center for inviting me to this annual conference and for all of the terrific work that you do in educating American people about the realities of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Ed spoke of the massive changes in Jerusalem. This is a panel on the changing face of Jerusalem. Indeed, there have been staggering changes to the physical environment in Jerusalem, especially in the last 10 years, but it's a process that's been going on since 1967 when East Jerusalem was occupied by the IDF and Israel vastly expanded the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem. These changes were designed to create an irreversible situation in Jerusalem. They were accompanied by the development of powerful mythologies about eternal, united Jewish Jerusalem. And while Israeli spokesmen would say they were flexible about making peace, even about giving up territory in the West Bank, the bottom line was that there would be no change in Jerusalem. And alas, the U.S. government and many others took that very seriously and have been even slower in recognizing the need to create a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem as one of the keys to peace than they have been in recognizing that there must be two states and a return of the other territories occupied in '67. In spite of these changes, and those of you who visit Jerusalem regularly will see them, the massive physical construction of barriers, checkpoints, walls, the physical decline of Arab East Jerusalem because of neglect by the Israeli municipality, the forced removal of any Palestinian political presence in East Jerusalem. Nevertheless, East Jerusalem remains the heart of Palestine. And while we can only hope that there will soon be a two-state peace in which the West Bank is returned to the Palestinians and Jerusalem becomes a capital, we're far from certain that that will happen. But I think we can be certain that East Jerusalem will remain Arab Jerusalem, and that the Palestinian populace of Jerusalem, which is indeed expanding, is not going to abandon it, nor will the rest of the Palestinian community. It's not just a city. It is a place of vast historic, religious, emotional importance to the rest of the world. It's not simply a matter of the struggle between Israelis and Palestinians. It is uniquely important to Muslims worldwide, Jews worldwide, and to Christians for reasons that are well known to all of you. Traditionally, Jerusalem has been the political, cultural, and economic capital of Palestine. And it is now understood by those who have studied the problem that Jerusalem, while one of the most difficult issues to resolve, must be resolved if there is to be two states and real peace. The Palestinians have acknowledged and that West Jerusalem will be the Jewish capital. They have not demanded it as part of their proposal for peace. Indeed, West Jerusalem, the populace of West Jerusalem has been Jewish for over a century. They have asked and demanded that East Jerusalem be the capital of the new Palestinian state. The myth of united, undivided, eternal Jerusalem is just that. It's a myth. It is a city that's deeply divided. It is not a city of peace. There's continued conflict within Jerusalem. Someone has said that Jerusalem is the volcanic core of the Israel-Palestine conflict. In part, that's true. The potential for violence in East Jerusalem is constant, and violence there has an even greater impact than elsewhere. Yet the people of Jerusalem, having lived in a multicultural, multi-religious city for many, many centuries, have tried to hold the place together. But it's a dangerous place, and unless the Jerusalem problem is acknowledged and resolved, it will remain a very dangerous place. Well, the myth of united Jewish Jerusalem and the vast expansion of the boundaries into this area here after the 67 conquest of traditional East Jerusalem was designed, as I said, to prevent an irreversible situation. The philosophy of facts on the ground was even more profound here than here, because gradually Israeli governments have recognized that ultimately they must withdraw from at least part of the West Bank. But they believe they can hang on to Jerusalem, and all Israeli governments have been adamant about the impossibility of any compromise in Jerusalem. In part, that adamancy is not based upon the presence of Jewish historic sites or a Jewish presence in this vast area here. It is designed, I believe, to make even more difficult a resolution of the larger problem. The experiment in turning East Jerusalem into part of Jewish Jerusalem has failed. In fact, in spite of 200,000 Israeli settlers who have been placed in East Jerusalem over the last 40 years, the Arab populace has at least kept pace. The construction of the security barrier, which is designed to seal off East Jerusalem from its Palestinian hinterland, ironically resulted in an increase of the East Jerusalem Arab population. Recognizing that the wall was going up, many Palestinians were quick to move to East Jerusalem, establish their residence there. For years, we Americans would hear about from the authorities that Jerusalem was a kind of happy mosaic of different peoples and different faiths. It was not true. And the mayor of Jerusalem at that time, for many years, Teddy Kollek, who had been brilliant in promoting this myth of a happy, benign, pluralistic city, admitted this after he retired. Having boasted for years about all that the Israeli government and the municipality had done for East Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek finally acknowledged that they had done very little, and that the Israeli government policy toward East Jerusalem had been very, very unfair. The idea that East Jerusalem is precious to all the Jewish people was rebutted in a very good book some of you may have read a decade ago by Jerome Siegel, who carried out polling among the Palestinians and the Jews about what their image of Jerusalem was. And to his surprise, the two communities have very different views about what Jerusalem really is. He said that the great majority of Jews, when they conceive of Jerusalem, they think about West Jerusalem, they think about the Temple Mount, as they call it, and the Mount of Olives Cemetery. None of this area here has a deep resonance for most Israelis, and Yerushalayim is confined to what is mostly West Jerusalem. For the Palestinians, Al-Quds does not include West Jerusalem. For them, it is East Jerusalem and these areas here. That was a promising discovery because it shows that it is a myth that all of this expanded Jerusalem is precious to the Jewish people and therefore cannot be abandoned in a peace process. Well, today, the Israeli government policies in East Jerusalem have been very bad for the entire city. When I lived in Jerusalem between 88 and 91, it was an open city. There was free transit between anywhere in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Today, East Jerusalem is an unkempt, poor, neglected city. West Jerusalem, once a place where many Israelis wanted to live, is in decline. Young Israelis have fled to Tel Aviv, and the most dynamic growing community in Jerusalem are the ultra-Orthodox. It's a very unhappy place. If you go there, your vision of Jerusalem will probably depend upon whom your tour guide is, and you get a very different version of the city depending upon whether your guide is an Israeli or Palestinian. As you recall, Resolution 181 in 1947, which attempted to partition Palestine, called for what it called a corpus separatum, a very large area which includes the geographic area of Jerusalem plus the outlying Arab villages, Bethlehem, Abowd, and others. That was to be an international city. It would be ruled by an international UN-appointed governor. David Ben-Gurion, the then putative Israeli leader, accepted it. Indeed, Ben-Gurion himself had no use for Jerusalem. It's not well known, but he saw it as a backward, fanatic, religious city. He wanted no part of Jerusalem, and he, as had the founder of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl, saw Tel Aviv as the capital of the new Jewish state, a modern city, a secular city. That was their vision, but of course that vision didn't last. In the 48 war, the Israeli forces, having conquered the areas which had been assigned to a Palestinian state by the Resolution 181, stopped at what became the Green Line through Jerusalem because of the covert alliance that Israel had established with Emir Abdullah of Jordan. And of course that didn't last, because in 1967, as many IDF commanders and Israelis had advocated in 1948, went all the way and seized East Jerusalem together with the rest of the West Bank. The UN, the United States, and the entire international community declared that the status of Jerusalem could not be resolved unilaterally by military conquest. Only a handful of states established their embassies in Jerusalem. Almost all of them, including the United States, were established in Tel Aviv and remain in Tel Aviv. The rest of the world has acknowledged de facto that West Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, but it has since '67 regarded East Jerusalem as occupied territory. Unfortunately, the U.S. Policy toward Jerusalem, which was quite strong before the 1980s, it made no distinction between East Jerusalem and the West Bank. It declared that the Fourth Geneva Convention governed Israel's occupation of East Jerusalem, but that policy was attenuated after 1980. You all remember when President Reagan was asked about the Fourth Geneva Convention, which had been U.S. doctrine until then, he said, no, I don't think that Israeli settlements are illegal. After that, we abandoned our doctrine. It's still on the books, but no American official since then has said that settlements are illegal under international law, as of course they are. We forfeited a very valuable tool when we abandoned our international law position on Jerusalem. Jimmy Carter, whose contributions to peace in Israel have been profound, nevertheless made a terrible mistake in 1981 when, after the U.S. had voted for a Security Council resolution, I believe it was 465, which declared the illegality of settlements throughout the West Bank, including Jerusalem, under huge pressure, political pressure here at home. He reversed our vote. And since then, it has been downhill. And the U.S. Has shrunk from asserting any policy toward East Jerusalem, has regarded it as something unique and special. And while our policy has evolved in some ways, it is U.S. spokesmen are still very reluctant to describe American views of Jerusalem. Now, there was a moment after the breakdown of the Camp David summit in 2000 when the Clinton administration finally adopted a policy on Jerusalem that what is Jewish in Jerusalem will be Israeli, what is Palestinian will be part of the Palestinian state. That was short-lived because that, by definition, that proposal, the so-called Clinton parameters, were withdrawn from the table. The same policy was articulated by Israeli and Palestinian diplomats themselves in the famous Abowd talks, which were the last gasp effort of the negotiators to create two states. But that was abandoned by their leaders. That is still there, and I would expect that if, and I dearly hope this happens, the United States decides to adopt a real policy on peace and two states, which offers for the first time in years U.S. views on the final status issues of Jerusalem, settlements, refugees, security, and borders, that we will pick up where the Clinton parameters and the Taba negotiators left off. One important watershed has been the Arab League Declaration of 2002. In the midst of the savage mutual violence of the Second Intifada, the Arab League declared that the issue of Jerusalem must be negotiated, that the Arab states would establish normal relations with Israel if the Israelis could negotiate a two-state peace and resolve through negotiations the issues of territory, borders, Jerusalem, and refugees. There have been other initiatives which have addressed Jerusalem since then. The Nusebi Ayalon plan called for two capitals in Jerusalem. The Geneva Accord of 2003 has an elaborate prescription for two capitals in Jerusalem, political division of the city, and the roadmap in 203, while it called for negotiations on Jerusalem, ultimately it did not offer any policy prescription. There has been, then, a broad convergence of views among all but the most dedicated ideologues and political extremists, a recognition that Jerusalem must be the two capitals, that it is central to a two-state peace. The hardest issue, of course, is how to deal with sovereignty over the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount. Jerome Siegel, whom I mentioned, had the novel suggestion that sovereignty be assigned to God. I think that's probably impractical. I think there is a way to maintain the Muslim Arab sovereignty, which has been de facto recognized even during the past 40 years. while according protection to the remnants of the Second Temple under the platform and the Haram. The Canadians have, a group of Canadian diplomats have come up with another solution for the old city. That is that it is so difficult to resolve, in the view of these experts, that it has to be postponed, even though there is an agreement for the other final status issues. There's controversy about this. They think that by creating a temporary internationalized regime for the old city, which provides for security, which has a joint Israeli-Palestinian board and a internationally appointed administrator, it will be easier to ultimately resolve the issue of the old city. I don't agree myself. I think if the issue of sovereignty over the old city, the Temple Mount, is postponed, it will remain a source of conflict, and the rest of an agreement would not hold together. I think there has to be a package which includes Jerusalem. A resolution of Jerusalem will have to accompany a resolution of the refugee issue, the two most difficult issues probably, and there is a kind of trade-off there, I think, which I think will emerge. Well, we would be perhaps over-optimistic to expect major changes soon. The current Obama effort, in spite of bold promises a year and a half ago, seems to have foundered over the issue of a settlement freeze, a very modest proposal which wouldn't have done much to resolve the deeper conflict. But there is still hope that after the November elections there will be a Plan B in which the U.S. will offer either terms of reference which will address the final status issues in a way that the U.S. never has, except for the short-lived Clinton parameters, or even a bolder American peace initiative which will spell out in some detail what must be done. If this happens, I think there will be another chance to resume a real peace process. If we leave it to the parties themselves, they will fail, as they have for the last 15 years, unless there is a vigorous, ambitious, sustained, and courageous American peace initiative which mobilizes the international community, which mobilizes the Arab League, which reaches out to the progressives in Israel and Palestine. I think we're in for many more years of terrible conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers of this wonderful day of panels and conversation. As Ambassador Wilcox said, can you all hear me with this, or maybe I shouldn't even use this? I need to use it, okay. We've been, of course, to start off the day's events, asked to commence the day's analysis by approaching the issues of settlements, the politics of land. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about movement and the politics of movement and how Palestinian movement into and through their capital city, Jerusalem, has been mitigated, reduced, and policed, criminalized over the last couple of decades, but particularly since 2000, 2001. And of course, we could speak all day, sadly, about the litany of new and also abiding restrictions on movement for Palestinians, which in many ways have become particularly intense over the last 2 years. But it's particularly with regard to Jerusalem, which is where what I'll center on. But it should be noted, it should be emphasized, and Ambassador Wilcox did sufficiently what I wanted to lay out a little bit, which is to emphasize that East Jerusalem is no less occupied territory than Nablus. And therefore, that Israeli effort historically to try to separate out a Jerusalem that will be kept as Israel's eternal capital and other parts of the West Bank with dense population concentrations of Arabs will be left out, perhaps, in a future vision of a Jewish state would not need or want those populations, just the land that those populations live and farm on. So I'd like to begin this way with an examination, not of this map, which we'll get to in a second, but a mention of a new experimental documentary that's recently been made, and my assistant here, my tech assistant will bring this up. Don't play it quite yet. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's a documentary called Journey 110. Does anyone see this, by the Palestinian filmmaker Khalid Jarrar? It's really quite incredible. And I really think this, I'm going to show you just a few seconds of it, but this short visual document, to my mind, more than just about anything else I've seen recently, encapsulates the everyday character of life under occupation for Palestinians. And that the everyday sort of lived micro dimensions of life under occupation are often not spoken about or written about. And instead, we focus on important things like the wall, of course, the separation wall and the checkpoints, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But the film features footage from Jerusalem's periphery, and it reveals what the 43-year, 4-month, and 23-day occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, what life there is like. For close to 13 minutes, I'm only going to show you about 20 or 30 seconds. For close to 13 minutes, this video with no narration shows us, the audience, people of all ages, from young, healthy young men and women to the elderly who look like grandparents. It chronicles their experience of trying to move into Jerusalem through a very surreptitious way. And it will show you these individuals, Palestinians, strapping on large plastic bags over their shoes, tying them up to their knees, tying them tightly, and then making their way through an 110-meter long sewage pipe that takes them from outside Jerusalem, as defined by Israel, into Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem. And viewers can, as you watch this, can almost smell the stench of that which passes through sewage pipes and the humiliating acts, and I want to talk about this, the sort of small cruelties and humiliation that everyday people feel in everyday sorts of ways under occupation. So why don't I was going to show you a picture, but we've got video now, so we'll show you just the first 20 seconds of this.
الله يعطيكم يا رب، الله يعطيكم، الله يعطيكم يا الله.
Do watch it. Do get a hold of Journey 110 if you can. It is quite poignant. Okay, well, criminalizing movement in this way that eventuates in these sorts of forms of resistance, criminalizing movement into and through and even out of Jerusalem, the presence of Palestinians in their own city, the city that is their capital, in places where many of their families have lived for many, many generations, long before Israel was established, as most of us know, and long before many of the soldiers, if you actually cross through these checkpoints and experience, go through that experience, you'll see that many of the soldiers who staff these checkpoints, these police emplacements, these security emplacements, are not, their Hebrew isn't even as good as the Palestinians from the West Bank. Some of them have been there, arrived 2 months ago or last Tuesday, and here they are regulating the flow of people into their city. Important to note also that the question of mobility is not just into Jerusalem, but also through Jerusalem. And the recent events that have been taking place in the village of Silwan, more a neighborhood than village now in East Jerusalem, within Israeli-defined East Jerusalem, is emblematic of some of the ways in which East Jerusalem residents who have residency IDs, or the right to be there, are recognized by Israel as residents, not citizens of Israel, but East Jerusalem residents, are targeted in all sorts of ways by very violent settlers and soldiers. I don't know if anyone saw the clip that surfaced a couple weeks ago of an Israeli settler hitting a Palestinian child with a car, using a car as a weapon. Something that... 60 minutes. Yes, 60 Minutes did a segment on this. So increasingly, Arabs in Jerusalem are told that they cannot live or walk or be present in vast areas of the city, that instead has to be taken for to build settlements. Some of these settlements being, mammoth cities of, densely packed 30,000 people. They can't go there anymore, and even though these settlements are overwhelmingly built on their land. And of course, these efforts are typically justified in the name of security, which we've all heard about. And the discourse of security has, in a sense, contributed to the things that go on in Silwan at the checkpoints, where forms of humiliation and human rights abuses and even forms of sexual degradation are happening more and more by soldiers and people who staff these checkpoints, but also settlers within the city. In a place like Silwan, which is historically, for hundreds of years, a place where Palestinians have lived, and now the 25, 30,000 odd Palestinians who live there are now basically policed to protect, I believe, about 70 Jewish families, settlers who are living in these buildings, sometimes in the houses of Palestinians that have been taken. So movement is constrained by security concerns, and it's the security of the settlers, it's the security of the soldiers that so often provides a justification for these kind of violations of movement, the rights of movement, which are enshrined in, the rights are enshrined in international legal documents, which Ambassador Wilcox began to talk about. Maybe I'll skip over that in the interest of time. But the use of security, I think, is something anyone who's interested in helping to resolve this issue needs to, especially in this country, needs to wrap their heads around and develop a critique of. Because for many reasons, not least of which is that the kind of contorted logic that justifies security measures has a kind of fanning out effect that has contributed to greater and greater expropriations of Palestinian land. It's a contorted logic that sort of goes something like this, if you think about it. We, the occupier, need to build bypass roads built on land appropriated from Palestinians to protect settlers illegally housed on other land stolen from Palestinians. And then it is vital, the Israeli authorities assert, to take other lands, other areas, to build walls to protect illegal roads connecting illegal settlements. Then we need to take land on either side of the wall, perhaps destroy, as has happened, hundreds of Palestinian homes and the appropriation of many areas of farmland on either sides of this illegal wall to ensure the security of the illegal roads that connect the illegal settlements, et cetera, et cetera. This dynamic really has a fanning out effect, and has, and I think sometimes it sort of precludes us from remembering the earlier layers of illegality long before the wall, so that have actually enabled the separation wall, the apartheid wall. It's been called many different things. The Israelis call it a security fence often. There you have it, and we often devote, as we should, attention to the wall without understanding or sort of paying attention to the earlier moments of appropriation that are illegal by the terms of the Geneva Accords and international law. So let me go to this second map, the second image, which is a map of the checkpoints drawn up by the Israeli human rights group Maxum Watch, or Checkpoint Watch, which is also, this group refers to themselves as Women Against Occupation and for Human Rights. Maxum Watch has been in existence since 2001 and is an organization of Israeli women, mostly peace activists, who go and monitor what the Israeli army is doing at these checkpoints. in the interest of monitoring, in their words, what they refer to as, quote, the systematic repression of the Palestinian nation. It's good to have friends like this in Israel if you're a Palestinian who care very deeply about what the sort of everyday forms of violence that are happening at these checkpoints. Well, here's a map that they've devised, and the checkpoints actually around Jerusalem. I should probably use this. How do we turn this? Well, maybe I'll just point. Here's Jerusalem, the expanded boundaries, expanded in 67, as Ambassador Wilcox said. And then these are various checkpoints around the city. There are 10, 11, or 12 that insulate it from movement into the Jerusalem by Palestinians overwhelmingly. Let me show you an example of another checkpoint. This is the checkpoint the Israeli authorities refer to as Hazeitim checkpoint on the far eastern edge of Jerusalem, erected in the last, I believe, 5 or 6 years. And here's a sign right in front of this huge. People often think of checkpoints as a couple of empty barrels and a watchtower and four soldiers. This is a huge military emplacement covering several acres or dunams of land. And there's the instructions, of course. You see, when you go through Israel and Palestine, you'll see many Israeli signs with this sort of yellow background, usually Hebrews on top, but at the checkpoint, the Arabic's at top. And you give out the orders with the English translation below. You're now entering a military area. Avoid unnecessary delay. Read the instructions and then obey them. March one by one through the emplacement, and then at the bottom, have a good day. This is another view of the same checkpoint that is, like I said, it's on to the left, actually. I wanted to actually take the picture that shows the village of, this is the Mount of Olives from the eastern side, the village of Tur, Palestinian village of, there must be 20,000 people who live there. And to get to that village for family members or people who work there, on the other side of the emplacement, the checkpoint has been increasingly difficult over the last 10 years. And it's actually tightened over the last 1 or 2 years. So Palestinian movement into and through the city is quite profoundly limited. And it's limited not simply by these kind of physical, dramatic divides and walls and checkpoints, but also through a series of legal and bureaucratic methods and realities meant to diminish the Arab presence in this contested city. And the organizers of the conference have called this panel, referred to what we're supposed to be talking about as sort of the de-Arabization of Jerusalem, and that's exactly what is happening. And as we examine the gradual appropriation of Jerusalem, once again, let us remember that the borders where the checkpoints are that are said to sort of insulate Jerusalem are themselves borders drawn by the Israelis unilaterally. In other words, there's not, when you look at a cartographic representation, there's a Jerusalem there. It's not like this is some eternal essence of Jerusalem. This is a redefinition of Jerusalem that can be redrawn again. One doesn't have to take the logic of the 67 Israeli military authorities, civilian authorities, to reconceptualize what a Jerusalem might be in the future. There are 2 Israeli policies I want to very quickly concentrate on, and you've said 5 minutes. Okay, so I'll go very quickly through them. There are 2 Israeli policies with regard to movement and to the both de-Arabization of Jerusalem and also the regulation of movement into the city that have been pretty profoundly damaging to the population. The first is the revocation of Jerusalem Ids, which is part of an entire bewildering campaign by the Israeli government that some have referred to, B'Tselem, actually the Israeli human rights group, has referred to as a movement permit regime, which makes even movement in the West Bank from town to town, even until very recently, I understand it's loosening up a little bit, but movement from place to place, not just into Jerusalem, but from Ramallah to Nablus, you need permits, and if you don't have them, you can't move outside of Ramallah. But you also can't move into Jerusalem, which is even more difficult to do. Now, following Israel's conquest of this part of Jerusalem in 67, those Palestinian residents who happened to stay there were present in the city at the time of the first census were granted by the Israeli occupying power residency, what was called permanent residency status in the city. Papers, they were seen as Jerusalem residents. And Israel's current efforts, which have become intensified in the last year or two, to eject Palestinian citizens from the city by trying to justify the revocation of their right to be there, by take away their Israeli permission to be there, their permits, or their IDs, has been actually quite a substantial campaign that many people are not aware of. But let me just give you a few statistics in the interest of time, because they do affect the daily lived experiences of occupation. This is data from the Israeli Ministry of Interior. In 2007, 229 Palestinians lost their residency rights in Jerusalem. 229. In 2008, the number climbed to 4,672 Palestinians. A trend that Palestinian legal expert Diana Bhutto believes is a new and dangerous trend that's going to intensify and will contribute to the ejection of many thousands of Palestinians more from the city. The second major set of policies has the effect of also pushing Palestinians out of Jerusalem, and that is home demolitions, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. Home demolitions, along with bureaucratic practices of very high taxes, of preventing Palestinians from getting permits to build, which encourage and in fact compel Palestinians to leave outside of Jerusalem, where they can build more cheaply and with fewer restrictions. More than 18,000 Palestinian homes have been destroyed by Israel since 1967, several thousand of which have been in Jerusalem or in the Jerusalem environs. Often the land of the destroyed homes is then seized by Israel for security purposes or some other rationale. And in addition to the already devastating effect of demolitions that we've seen, there's also this kind of hidden, simmering fear that it's been described to me, Palestinians describe as sort of fear on simmer, because many thousands of more Palestinian homes have been slated for demolition. The families have been given demolition orders, and they don't know when the Israelis will come, if they come, or when they will come to demolish their home. And so many people live in this status with the fear of not knowing if tomorrow at 6 a.m. their home's going to be destroyed, or maybe 6 years from now, we don't know. Here's an example of both a destroyed home on the right, which if you go through Jerusalem, you see piles of rubble like this that sort of scatter the landscape. But next to it is a really encouraging effort of solidarity work between Palestinians and Israelis from the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, ICAD, which I know many of you are familiar with, to rebuild homes that have been destroyed in violation of Israeli law, in violation of the demolition order, but civil disobedience nonetheless. Let me just skip to the end, because I know I don't have much time. Here's another example of a demolished home, and one of thousands of examples, or hundreds at least, of pictures one could take. I would conclude, if I had to conclude right now, which I have to, I would conclude this way, by drawing from what I regard as the strength of a lot of this joint solidarity and political work across boundaries. A lot of Israelis, like the women in Maksum Watch, the individuals in Israeli, in ICAD, and many other organizations are trying to reach out and oppose their government's occupation in ways that build some sort of future with the people, Palestinians, that they live next to and are destined to live next to or among in the future. And these daily, everyday lived experiences of humiliation, it seems to me, are important to always keep in mind, as they are, I think, in many ways as vital to examine as the more dramatic forms of domination. I end with a recent quote from the former Israeli Speaker of the Knesset, Avraham Berg, who many of you have heard of, a man who, as leader, one of the leaders of the Israeli Labor Party in the 80s and 90s, was actually involved in the very human rights abuses and policies of de-Arabization that we've been talking about this morning. And a man who many will know has gone through apparently a very major ideological transformation in terms of how he regards Zionism, how he regards the idea of the occupation, what he believes Israel must do, the onus on Israel to withdraw from land that has been that their state is built on, not just in East Jerusalem, but in West Jerusalem too. I mean, the 30% of West Jerusalem is land that was taken from Palestinians in 48, and we shouldn't forget that. But let me end with a quote from Berg, who I was surprised to hear, but he was interviewed recently by a Palestinian journalist who made a film and included this segment of the film called East Side Story about Jerusalem. Has anyone seen this by Mohammed Al-Attar? And Berg is in this, toward the end of the film, is quoted as saying this with regard to the realities in 2008, 9, and 10 that Palestinians are living under. He says that, I look at these realities and I wonder how it is that Israelis can watch the brutality against another people that they would condemn in a minute if it were being done to a Jewish minority anywhere else in the world. How can we watch this and not be opposed to these policies and laws and forms of humiliation when they are happening to Palestinians just a few hundred meters away? Thank you.